The Blue Jays continue to roll after taking the first three games against the New York Yankees. Hey everyone, welcome into Long Ball. Rob Wong, joined alongside by Toronto Sun Blue Jays writer Rob Longley. And Rob, I think we've been talking about it pretty much all season long, how different this year feels compared to last season, where by this time I think the season was pretty much over for the Blue Jays and for a lot of their fans. But here they are right now as we record this in a tie for first place with the New York Yankees. The latest they've been in first place in the AL East since 2016. Just another dramatic victory in Game 3 of this series. A bit of a comeback win, if you want to call it that. I know they never trailed, but the momentum was squarely in the Yankees' favor before the Blue Jays scored 2 runs there late in the game to ultimately win it. But what are your thoughts about what this Blue Jays team is doing right now? Because as I mentioned, the vibes are a complete 180 from a year ago.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, Rob, on a lot of levels. As you mentioned, they haven't been in first place beyond April since 2016, and we all remember how good that 2016 team was, and we all know what sort of promise and projections were with this team basically from 2020 on, and now we're sort of finally seeing some of the realization of that. Clearly, a long way to go still, but the fact that they're 9 or 10 games above 500 and they have a share of first place with the Yankees, that they've won the first 3 games of this 4-game series and done it in sometimes impressive and sometimes dramatic fashion. I mean, it says a lot about what's going on with the team. And by that, I mean, there really is a different vibe around them, and we tend to use that word as a cliche in sports too often, but there's definitely something going on in that clubhouse that I haven't seen in the 8 years that I've been covering the beat. And my first year was 2017, and different bunch of personalities amongst that group. And once things started going south towards the end of that season, it's been dramatically different ever since. And I think, most notably, you compare it to what it was last year. Something's changed around there. Guys last year were not happy with the way things were going. I think there was an issue of communication sometimes from whether it was from management to the coaching staff to the players. I don't think that the order of the way that information was communicated helped matters. But certainly when you were headed for a last place season, basically from this point on, as you noted, it's pretty much impossible to create a positive vibe. But something happened in the offseason, something happened in spring training. And, even when they were going through some struggles early in this season, very much a roller coaster first couple months of the season, even when they were going through that, there was still this sort of sense of resiliency with these players, and that things would turn around eventually. And, they have turned around. And all of a sudden they're a team that's a legit contender for the division. And I think maybe most importantly, because it's a long season, it's going to turn again. At some point, they're going to go through a lull, whether it's a 4 or 5 game losing streak, whether it's dropping 8 of 10 or something like that. They've built themselves a cushion so that that's not going to do a lot of damage to them. But most importantly, in my opinion, is they've showed that resiliency that I'm talking about, that they know that they're better than whatever poor phase they go through, and that they can rebound from it. And I think that's going to serve them well, not only as we get to the trade deadline, and not only as we get to meaningful September baseball, and it's virtually guaranteed that we have that, but perhaps into October, if they're indeed in the playoffs and maybe can finally make some noise after a number of years of promise of doing just that.
Well, it's interesting. You go back to a season ago, and I think a lot of the talk was if you had a healthy Bo Bichette and George Springer wasn't playing the way he was, maybe the Blue Jays could have been a little bit better. And you go into this season where, Bo Bichette has been better. He's been healthier, of course. I know he's banged up right now, just missing the last couple of games. But George Springer has absolutely turned back the clock, Rob. We know Vlad Jr. is going to go to the All-Star game in Atlanta as a starter. I think the expectation is Alejandro Kirk is probably going to be a reserve as well. But with what Springer is doing, do you think he deserves a nod for the American League All-Star team?
Yeah, he most certainly does, Rob, for the first time in a few years, and I would be quite surprised actually if he didn't get it. It was, people had written him off legitimately because of the type of season that he had last year. It was basically awful, and if they're being honest, anybody in management and even the coaching staff would probably have told you that there is some fear as to what's going to happen with the last 2 years of his contract. obviously they wouldn't admit that publicly, and obviously they hope that they could mine some of that talent that George Springer has used earlier in his career. But lo and behold, they dropped him in the order. They got him to change his mental approach to hitting. John Schneider has said it a few times this year that they told George to, we don't need you to get on via the singles. We want you to do some damage. This is a team that needed some home run power, and he's got 13 of them now. Obviously the two on Canada Day, including the Grand Slam, were sort of like the highlight reel toppers for what he's done so far. But he's doing so much more than that. I mean, he's getting on base, he's stealing bases. He's just we talked to him on after the Canada Day game, and you get the sense that he really is rejuvenated. Like he's seen the highest of highs in this game. He was a World Series MVP. He won a World Series with the Houston Astros. He came here to help transform Toronto into that type of team. And you remember the talk when they signed him, Rob? It was they're getting this guy for September and October because he's experienced at that. And we really haven't seen enough flashes of that at the right time, and now he's doing it. And I think even the greater good of it all is guys are feeding off of it. Now all of a sudden George Springer is a legitimate leader in that clubhouse. You can try to be a leader by reputation, which was probably the case last year, but it doesn't hold nearly as much water if you're struggling to hit above 200. But when you start to lead the offense the way that he's doing it this year, it's been one of the remarkable stories, not just with the Blue Jays, but around baseball. And yeah, I would think that by all means he should be headed to Atlanta as part of the American League team. And I'd be quite surprised if he wasn't named.
Well, credit to George Springer, credit to the coaching staff, credit to the whole organization for finding the fountain of youth for a guy who is 35 years old. And like you mentioned, in the final few years of his contract here, on the back nine of his career, it's been an incredible season so far for George Springer. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. For Rob Longley, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.